We have Dr. Shivani Pandit with us, who is going to compare the traditional and the current approaches to intervention for children with disabilities. I would just briefly like to introduce Dr. Shivani Pandit. Dr. Shivani Pandit is a special educator who is working in the field of disability since last 25 years. She has a doctorate degree in special education from Rutgers University, USA. She has been trained in ABA, incidental teaching, intensive early behavioral therapy techniques for working with children with autism spectrum disorders from birth to 5 years of age. She is also the founder director of Samarthya Foundation USA. As the founder CEO of the Samarthya Foundation, she envisioned and is uh, spearheading an inclusive children's books initiative to change young children's understanding and attitudes towards their peers with disability. Uh, Warm welcome on the behalf of our parents, our organizers. Over to you, Shivani madam.
Thank you so much, Somil. Thank you so much for such a warm welcome and a very big good afternoon to all the parents. Sometimes I get confused because of the time difference. It's morning here, but I guess it's noon, 12:15, I think there, right?
Yes,
So good
madam.
afternoon to all of you. All of you are sitting here during your lunch hour, I guess. So thank you for that. Thank you for taking the time for me. And just give me 1 second. I will set this up. Okay, as Somil said, my name is Shivani Pandit. I'm a special educator, and it's my absolute pleasure to be here today for this National Parents Summit. You may have heard me at some point or the other through one of the SNCC's webinars that they've been doing for the past 6 months. If this is your first time, it's wonderful to meet you. And let's get started. I think we have a very short amount of time and I have a lot to say, but I will try to keep it as brief as possible and cover the content that we have and take some questions at the very end. I think in the meantime, of course, you would be typing up your questions in the chat box, as I'm sure you have been doing that. Our topic that I was given today is to talk about traditional versus current approaches to intervention for children with disabilities. So since I have been working in this field for over 25 years now, more than 25 years as a special educator. I got my initial training in India, and then I've been, getting all my doctorate degree, working experience, all of that in the US. I think in this, it seems like the field of disabilities has changed a lot. In many ways, it's changed a lot, and in many ways, it's still the same. It feels like it's very strange to say that, but it's like there's been a lot of change, but then there are many places where I find that things are a bit almost the same in India. And we will just talk about traditional meaning, maybe 25, 30 years ago, what things were like, I want to give you a quick overview of how the field of special education and rehabilitation sciences, has changed in the past 30 years. So I know that there's really a long way for our field to evolve. By no means are we in a place where it's perfect. There are lots of things that can be changed, lots of things that can be improved, but at the same time there are significant changes that have happened globally, and at the same time there are still significant challenges that children with disabilities face. And I'm just saying overall children with disabilities, it could include any disability category. We know that there are still challenges and barriers for children globally, but particularly in our country, we are all well aware of what those challenges are. But I think in today's session, I hope that you will walk away getting an understanding, of how far we have come. And what are the current approaches to intervention, and to see if you're familiar with some of them. And if this is something you need to, it's something new for you. Before I start, Somil, is it okay if I do in English or is it in Hindi? I'm sorry, I should have asked before.
English is fine.
Okay, thank you, Ashali. Okay, so today's agenda is we are going to touch upon understanding what are evidence-based based approaches. So understanding approaches to intervention and education. So it's not going to be very technical. I will try and explain to you as best as I can so that you can relate it to what you have seen working with your children and where you may want to go in the future. Perspective on service delivery, how service delivery has changed, access to services has changed, access to resources has changed from 35 years ago traditionally to today what we have, and some things to consider, some things to watch out for, some suggestions I'd like to leave you with where you can be thinking about when you access these resources today, what might you consider. So let's get going. Okay, so I want to start, the session with just talking about some of the approaches to research and policy making, world over. So I'm keeping it very general, in general with regards to US or the Western world, and of course to India. So to think about where we were when, let's say 30, 35 years ago, in terms of research and in terms of policy making, it's been a huge, I think the research in the field has evolved significantly in the past 30 years. We have a lot of research, good data on effective direct intervention, let's say for children with autism, what works, what doesn't work, what are the inclusive practices that schools can apply that actually work, what kind of teacher training programs should educators be utilizing so that children receive the most benefit out of them. Research on accessibility, research on effectiveness, and approaches to parent training. There's been a significant amount of research in the past 30 years on parent implemented interventions. That works particularly for economies and countries where there is a lack of professionals because of, let's say, where a parent lives, the city or the rural area. So there has been a lot of research looking at how can we make sure that interventions that are effective are reaching out to the children who need it the most, right? We have learned a lot in the past 30 years, I think, about what works and what doesn't work for children. At the same time, the legal frameworks, learning or implementation of policies or creation of policies is also significant change. I think today we have the RPWD Act in India, which of course didn't exist then. There are many government policies, and I think Mr. Raut, I was listening to his wonderful session before, he has given a lot of examples of all the current, legal frameworks and the policies and the provisions that are available to our children with disabilities and their families. So that in itself has been, I think, has seen a shift of, a sea change since the past 30 years. What didn't exist 30 years ago, or maybe existed, but not in a very sound, comprehensive way. I think we as a country, as a government, as people are seeing that change happen. So RPWD Act, I think learning about that, knowing more about that, seeing how you can utilize the existing services that are available for your children, I think that is something you can start from today. So that's a huge shift that we have seen in research practices. Another thing that is extremely exciting when we talk about current, as in today, is a lot of brain research. There is the importance of early intervention. And when I say early intervention, we mean children, diagnosed at birth to 6 years of age, typically is considered the window of early intervention. And I'm sure you all parents very well know this term, are very well familiar with what early intervention is. But the importance of early intervention has been solidified in the past few years, maybe 10 years or so, where we have learned there's been a lot of brain research that talks about neuroplasticity. And I don't know if you all are familiar with this term or not, or maybe this is a new term for you. The idea is that neuroplasticity is basically two words, neuro and plasticity, which means neurons, the cells in our brain, how our entire body is consistent of cells. There are cells in the brain as well. They are called neurons. When neurons connect with each other is how the brain functions. There's a connection between all the neurons, and there's millions and millions and millions of neurons in our brains. And when they connect with each other is when communication happens, all the development happens, right? So plasticity is something that can be molded, something that can be changed. I know 25, 30, 35 years ago, there wasn't enough brain research for us to understand that brain is plastic in nature. By that, it means that given the stimulations and the right kind of environment and the right kind of environment that is provided at a certain age, we know that we can mold the brain. We know that we can help the brain grow. That is called neuroplasticity. I think 35 years ago, there wasn't a concept like that. We believed that we are all born with the number of neurons and that's it, and that there isn't that kind of a growth or a plasticity. So it's actually very exciting to learn today that the power of early intervention, the importance of early identifications, which is why educators like myself focus so much on that, is that if we can work in this age group and provide the right kinds of therapies and interventions and supports, then we know that we can have a better outcome for the child, right? Then we talk about evidence-based practices. What are evidence-based practices? 30 years ago, this term didn't exist. There was no such thing as evidence-based practices. Okay, what does it mean? We have that today. I think it was coined, or the research came about in 2004, if I'm not mistaken, when the idea of evidence-based practices was put out in the research by researchers. So what it means is that every intervention that we apply for a child in a classroom is backed by research. So there is research behind saying that this works. So if we say any particular strategy, for example, PECs, there has to be, for the strategy to be considered evidence-based practice, there has to be evidence behind it, which means that lots of studies should have happened in that particular skill or subject area, and research should have been published. The research that is peer reviewed, in other words, a lot of educators or therapists or providers have looked at that research and confirmed that yes, indeed, this particular strategy works for children with communication disorders. PECS works for children with autism. So there is that evidence that we need to know. And this term was coined by researchers in 2004. And at least in the United States, a lot of the programs have to follow evidence-based practices. Of course, we know that there is a big difference between research and practice. I think as educators, I'm keenly aware that something could look really good and has a lot of research behind it and says that this is a great strategy, this will improve child outcomes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this will help the child in this way, this will help the family in this way. There could be a lot of research, but are we actually able to implement the research in real terms in classrooms and homes? There is a big disconnect. But then today we have a lot of research. We have a lot of evidence-based practices. If you want to know more about that and you Google, there are some very good websites, education websites, where you can understand, for example, what are the EBPs, as we call them, EBPs for children with autism. What strategies have some evidence behind them? So we know कि अच्छा, अगर इसके पीछे evidence है, तो हमको पता है ये चीज हम apply हमें करनी चाहिए. So we can derive the same benefits that the research studies are telling us. Correct? I hope that is clear. So this is an area that has seen a sea change 30 years ago. Say, aaj ke date mein, there are many evidence-based practices. And like I said, I think the situation might be different in India in schools where there isn't that focus on evidence-based practice. But I do believe that that's where we should be heading towards, because without evidence, it's a trial and error. राइट, विदाउट एविडेंस हम बोल सकते हैं ये भी काम करता है, वो भी काम करता है, ये भी, हर चीज काम कर सकती है किसी बच्चे के लिए, बट अनलेस वी हैव अ सॉलिड बॉडी ऑफ एविडेंस सपोर्टिंग इट, we cannot say that this is a good strategy, right? So another thing where we have seen a huge change is in inclusive practices. So 30 years ago, inclusion as a word or as a thing that people did looked very, very different. There was still a lot of, it started with segregation. If you all know that, 70 years ago, there was segregation, there was special schools which are separate, and I'm talking specifically to the United States. But that's how I think every society started. And I think slowly we moved towards from segregation, because of lack of knowledge, a lot of stigma, lack of awareness, we slowly change that, and parents, communities, and families and professionals work together to move the society from a segregation to an inclusive world, right? So in India, I think we're still on that journey. We cannot say that we are inclusive, but we are making the right steps in the right direction. And that has been in terms of whether it's making policies regarding inclusion, making accommodations in the classroom regarding inclusion, all those things are happening now currently. And this is all connected to parent awareness as well. Where parent awareness was, I think, 30 years ago, looks very different today, I'm sure, because all of you are an example of what that is. All of you who are extremely proactive in finding information, looking for information, listening to speakers, absorbing all this information. I'm not saying that that didn't exist 30 years ago, but the environment is so much more conducive and suitable for parents who really are proactive and want to take that charge. The resources and the supports, as we will talk about in the next few minutes, exist today. So today, the parent awareness, I feel, as a movement, parent involvement in education, special education, it looks very different. 30 years ago, parents were isolated still. They didn't have the ability to be as connected as today's parents are. And you all know that more than I do. How different does that look compared to when we were younger or our parents? It's a very different world. So that helps, that level of parent awareness, or the quality of parent awareness that has changed in the past 30 years, actually informs our research, right? Informs the policy making, right? Like Mr. Abhijit was just saying that you should know these, what do you call them, regulations and guidelines. That's all awareness, and that's easy access that you have today to those guidelines. And then you taking a proactive role in becoming an advocate, forming a parent group, writing to the district collector, all that informs the policy. So 30 years ago, it used to happen, but it was harder for parents to, I think it took a lot more effort, as we can all imagine, compared to today, because of the global sort of connectedness of the world. So let us take advantage of that connectivity, and let us take advantage of that power of technology that we can have today, and be able to make that maybe significant changes in the next decade or so, maybe a faster pace. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the perspective on disability then versus now. So what was the perspective on disability 30, 40, 50 years ago? We'll talk a little bit about the medical model versus the social model. We'll talk a little bit about deficit-based approaches to strength-based approaches, okay? So what is the medical model? What exactly is it? I think you may already be aware of it, but as we have looked at research, we have seen how the field of special education has moved from a medical model. A medical model can be considered a traditional model of disability, where people with disabilities were treated as sick or needing to be cured, right? This idea of curing someone is under the medical model. So experts on disability were considered the experts. So it could be doctors, nurses, or therapists. And most of the services that were provided then were focused on somehow fixing the child, as in somehow the idea was we have to cure it in some way. So there was it started from there. The field of disability started very much from a medical model, where the child was identified with a disability, the diagnosis was given, and within the framework of that diagnosis, everything was understood. So nothing else. So it really was limiting. It was very limiting in that you have a disability diagnosis, and now you're going to view everything just from that medical point of view. This is the diagnosis, this is what the child cannot do, this is what the child is having difficulty with, just within that. So you can see कि ये कितना ज़्यादा सीमित है ये इस तरीके की सोच. Then तब ये सोच हुआ करती थी. एक एग्जाम्पल है फॉर दिस कि अगर व्हील चेयर्स हैं प्रोवाइडेड लेकिन स्ट्रीट्स आर नॉट एक्सेसिबल, दैट्स अ वेरी मेडिकल मॉडल कि समहाउ जो व्हील चेयर पे बैठे हैं उन्हें ही फिगर आउट करना पड़ेगा कि वो कहाँ से कहाँ कैसे जाएंगे, but not the environment is not supporting that. And I know that we some parts of the world, maybe most parts of the world, are still adhering to this model. I understand that, I recognize that. And I think that we have to really push to evolve from this towards the next two models that I'm going to talk about. The second model, which is current, second and the third, which is social and biopsychosocial. So these are very big terms, but simply if I have to explain that in the social model, the understanding is that we focus on the environmental, right? Environmental and attitudinal barriers to disability, so that we understand that because the environment is not supportive, because the attitudes of the world are not supportive, this person, if we are preventing this person with disabilities to have an equal opportunity in the society. You see the difference? We have moved from the idea that there is a disability and it's medically driven, correct, to looking at, okay, there is a disability which is medically driven, but what about the world in which this child lives? What about the school in which he or she lives? So if the child has a physical disability, is on a wheelchair, and we make ramps in the school, what happens? The child is no more disabled in that sense. The child is able to equally participate in the school, in the classroom, just like any other kid. But if we didn't have ramps, then what? The child is by definition excluded. So we talk about inclusion, we are moving towards the social model. So this whole Accessible India campaign, all these things are moving in that direction of social model of disability, where we have to pay attention to the environmental factors that make a child disabled, or facilitates their disability, right? Doesn't support them to become inclusive, or even attitudinal barriers that you may have. And most disability right activists today really embrace the social model. An example, or it could also be called a human rights based model as well. I think an example of a social model at work is, let's say कि a teacher has made a PowerPoint, जो class का PowerPoint है वो पूरा he or she has made it available on the blackboard ahead of the class. क्यों? ताकि maybe a child who has dyslexia can look up the main words that they don't understand. Maybe they pick up the vocabulary words that they don't know. They can go on Google and learn those words. They can see how the lecture is going to flow. They can understand, they can frame themselves in a sequence, and that helps them understand and retain the information more. So you see how if you have a class, if you have a child with dyslexia in your classroom, how you are able to modify and adapt the environment of the classroom, the environment of the curriculum, in a way that it allows the child with disabilities to be included, right? And that itself, that is an example of a social model. So we are not going to focus as much on the idea that he or she has a dyslexia, or what that means, or where it's coming from, or is it genetic or not. We are focused on the fact that if this child has difficulty in reading, processing information, how do we adapt the classroom so that he or she can participate in an equal manner as compared to his or her peers, right? So we are again moving towards inclusive model. And there is, both the models can be combined in a way, taking good parts from the medical as well as the social. And the third one is called the biopsychosocial, or it's an integration of both those. So in there, we take a perspective of biological issues, individual issues, and social issues. So it's like a hybrid model that we have currently going on today, or we should have. If we don't have that, I think that's the kind of model that a society should be moving towards. We have to move away from the medical model, which really should have existed only 30 years ago, but I know it still does exist. And there's a long way to go, like I said. But what is currently what works and creates positive outcomes for children and families, in the sense that they can be included more, is more of a combination, like a biopsychosocial model. And another point I want to make is that a lot of people, I think, in the world are willing to adopt the social model and make adjustments for children or students or people who have a visible disability, right? But if you have children who have invisible disabilities, or a hidden disability, so to speak, or a disability that's not clearly understood, then the adaptation becomes very difficult for people. So it's very complex, I understand that, but I just want you to see which direction should we be really moving towards. So we should definitely not be in the medical model phase. We should be moving towards a combination of models which helps us look at disability from a human rights perspective. Okay. All right. So we talk a little bit about approaches to intervention. Now, just two things I want to talk about mainly, and I really hope that you will take away this message home, because I think this is very, very important. There was traditionally, if you say, maybe based again on the medical model, the approaches used to be 30 years ago deficit based, 50 years ago deficit based. Deficit means कुछ कम होना, राइट? किसी चीज की कमी को हम डेफिसिट बोलते हैं. तो पूरा फोकस, all the focus would be on the diagnosis of the child's disability and what the child cannot do. सिर्फ उतने पे हम फोकस रखते थे तब, in the traditional approaches. What the child cannot do, and the entire system would operate from that level, and the entire intervention process would operate from that understanding, which is an extremely limiting and, in my opinion, a wrong approach to use. Why? Because, okay, where are we today? Today, we are looking at talking about promoting the strength-based approach. What is a strength-based approach? It's exactly the opposite of deficit, where we understand disability and the provision of services through looking at each child's unique strengths. Along with the challenges, of course, we always have to pay attention to the challenges, because we know with the disability, certain challenges are bound to rise up, right? That we know. But instead of just looking at I oftentimes give this example of a coin. It's two sides to the coin. There's the challenge and then there is the strength. So if we agar ek hi tarah se dekhte hain hum, to it's incomplete understanding of the child, and then it is going to lead to an incomplete delivery of services, right? So looking at the challenges, but also understanding what the child's strengths are. And I think as our understanding in this field has grown in the past 30, 40, 50 years, we are today at that level. Hopefully, if we are not, we must strive towards, looking at, talking about strength-based approach. I heard this, a little bit of examples of this in Mr. Raut's talk as well, where he was talking about just because you have a child with autism, you don't assume things, right? You have to do certain things. For example, the voting example he gave, you have a child with autism, you still go through with the processes and pay attention to your child and their individual strengths, and then work with them. So I think this is very close to my heart, and this is something that I really promote and teach when I work with parents, is this mind shift from deficit based, because I think for so many years we have all as a society believed in the deficit based model. It sometimes takes time for parents to even shift that. Some parents are already there. Some of you may already be using a strength-based approach. Some of you may already be in the journey. And for some of you, this may be a new concept. So I want you to try and pay attention and see if you can absorb this, is that no matter what the disability is, we are talking about looking at the child beyond the diagnosis. Okay, the diagnosis is here. We cannot change that. We are not going to talk about, curing or fixing or the diagnosis disappearing. This is lifelong. Whatever that diagnosis of a disability is, we know it's a lifelong condition, right? But we have to now not stop there. That's like a ceiling. We have to go above it and see the child beyond the diagnosis. So what does that mean? Looking at the child, meaning looking at their strengths, looking at their interests, looking at their abilities, whatever they may be. Sometimes it could be a matter of real observation and it's not that obvious. But unless you have the approach of a strength-based model, you will not see the child for who they are. You as in, I'm talking about any person, okay? If we shift that mindset, if we start to think about strength-based approach and use the word strength in context with our children, any disability, any age, what might be a strength that my child is exhibiting right now, and how can I invest in that particular strength or that particular interest, and how can I nurture it and facilitate it towards their journey in life? Right? So this is particularly important for all of you to, I hope when you walk away from this session, is to remember, if you remember one thing, remember the strength-based approach and how powerful it can be in how you view your child, how you view your family, how much are you able to accept the child's diagnosis, and then working with the professionals to to look at those strengths, to pick up those strengths, to invest in them, to provide interventions in them, and really help the child blossom in that particular area or areas. Okay, so I hope that this is clear. And another, related to this, related to the intervention approaches that I've been talking about, I think one intervention approach or category of intervention approaches that is gaining a lot of traction in the West, in the United States particularly, is moving away from special education services that are provided in a more clinical setting. Clinical meaning table chair पे बैठ के intervention हो रहा है, या किसी रूम में हो रहा है by itself, just the child goes into a room and आमने सामने हो रहा है. Special education की बात कर रही हूँ. I think for speech and occupational therapy it still works, but I think special education, which is more overall development of the child, I think we are moving from that to more naturalistic approaches. Naturalistic meaning things that are actually happening in the more of the routines of the child, and incorporating the interventions into a routines based sort of a mode. Because if we keep it very clinical, then we are not going to make that progress. So there is another, what used to happen maybe 30, 40 years ago was more of a clinical setting idea of interventions being provided. You go to a center and you get that kind of intervention without any natural sort of supports around it. To now, there is a huge shift in the United States around providing interventions in the context of a routine. So interventionists, therapists will do a home visit and help the parents see how the intervention can fit within the routine of a child, so it becomes more naturalistic. And so it has more, we can feel that it has more of a long lasting impact as the child grows, and it also empowers the parents a little bit more, because it helps, we coach parents in some of those strategies that they can apply at home even when the therapist is not there. Okay, so therapist is of course involved and required to create the program, to guide the parents, to coach the parents. But when it happens in a naturalistic environment, we feel that we have empowered an entire family, and not just like working with the child one-on-one. Because working with the child one-on-one, you're going to get benefits, of course. But when you include the family and you expand that context, the benefits are multifold. Okay, so that's our then what used to be the case. And if we are not in the strength-based approach, I think as an individual parent, I think try and move towards that direction. And I think definitely as a society, we have to go from deficit-oriented mindset to a strength-based mindset for sure. Correct? I think related to this, so all that I have talked about, what used to happen maybe 30, 40, 50 years ago in the US, and I think it still happens in many places in India. I know there's a lot of segregation. Segregation means separation. Matlab, alag se children with special needs are getting access to services. But I still think that we all in our minds are moving towards inclusion, meaning we want children with disabilities to interact and to work and to play and to study with children who are neurotypical, right? So whether it's inclusion happening at the social level or at the academic level, that is our goal, and that must be our sort of target where we are heading. Even if it's not academic inclusion, we must work on the social inclusion part of it, right? And we see that movement picking up, but I think we still have a really long way to go towards it. So I feel understanding neurodiversity, right, and working towards inclusion is a critical need of the hour. And I know currently there is a lot of effort being put in by educators and parents to provide that meaningful inclusive experience, right? Even if it's a simple social experience, but that is meaningfully inclusive, not forcefully, but it has to be meaningful, where a child with a disability feels as an equal partner with a child who's neurotypical. That's really our goal, correct? And I just want to take 1 second to talk about, if we were to talk about current approaches, is that in an effort to work in that direction, I think we must sensitize neurotypical children to have normalizing conversations with them about disabilities, right? So that I think didn't happen then. 30 years ago, I don't think that was happening, or maybe happening in very small ways here and there. I think even today it's happening in very small ways here and there. So that ways I feel in this regard, things really haven't changed. So what I mean by that is we do talk about inclusion, we do create programs and approaches and policies towards inclusion, but I don't know that we are doing enough work at the sort of ground level, which is a young child, and having normalizing conversations with about disabilities with them in order to make them more sensitive, empathetic, and inclusive minded adults. And I was just wanting to share that this specific thing is an initiative that I've started through Samarthya Foundation, where we create inclusive children's books. Each book focuses on a particular child with a disability who is the main character of the book. And the idea is through storytelling, we have storytelling sessions with neurotypical children to have those conversations for them to normalize disability, right? Moving from a completely deficit-based model to strength-based, that a child with a disability is a child first. Disability comes next. A child with a disability can be or should become your friend. And those kinds of conversations, I think, will lead to the next phase of inclusion, I think, in our country, because I still feel there's a huge gap in this area. I don't think this is happening that much, but I think we are moving in the right direction, so to speak. Okay, all right. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about approaches to service delivery. So we've talked about, the perspectives on disability as a whole. We've talked about perspectives on interventions, as a whole again. Now let's talk about what used to be the case then, 30 years ago, specifically in the context of service delivery, right? You receiving services, whether it's OT, PT, special education, physio, whatever it may be. So then versus now, I think this is the biggest one. This, obviously, we all know that access to virtual learning didn't exist, I don't think, even 10 years ago as much. And of course, this is a remarkable resource to have. I think even before we were hit with COVID and we started to use these virtual tools as a way to help ourselves, I think even before that, virtual learning was a great tool. I think a lot of people were doing that in India, maybe not as significant as it is today. Now I think it's everybody. But for parents to be able to connect with professionals in case there was non-availability of a professional in a particular city or a rural area, right? So in today's times, now this is all we have. I don't think we are able to do anything else but virtual. But the idea is that, intervention, providing direct intervention on Zoom or any Google Hangout was something completely unheard of 30 years ago. So I think that posed a great challenge to parents then, right? Because at that time, they just didn't have access to that. Then they didn't have access. Now you all have access to this particularly great resource. So I think, those days, either they would have to, all of you would have had to travel hours to access services, or they missed out on critical window of early intervention because just availability nahi tha, and traveling, money, financial constraints, all of it put together meant that children were somehow missing out. Now in today's scenario, we have that access, we have that virtual learning thing. So you can take advantage, and I'm sure you all have been taking advantage of this incredible resource for the past 1 year, because this is all we have now. But let's talk a little bit about paying attention to some basics before you dive deeper into this virtual journey. I think while it's a great resource and it has given us all something which is better than nothing, I always believe that a one-on-one session with a child in a room is the best. It's the most effective, and nothing can replace that ever, I don't believe. A teacher, a therapist in the room working directly with the child, being able to guide them, being able to prompt them, nothing can replace that. But at the same time, we are talking about the theme of the summit is challenges to opportunities. I think we have seen this as an opportunity and somehow tried to take advantage of it, right? All of you have done that. But I think a few things with this I would like to point out is having access to virtual learning is good. Utilize it to the best of your ability, but also know that pay attention to the professional who's providing their background. How many years of training have they got, how many years have they worked with children, and we know that working with a child like this virtually is very different from in person. I do those sessions and I realize how you need different skill sets even to be able to engage a child who's behind the screen, right? So that kind of a thing. Do they have those skills to support your child's needs? Are they supporting you as well in terms of coaching you to work with your child? Remember, we talked about this whole idea of coaching, parent coaching, and how effective it is in the naturalistic context. Are the professionals you're working with pay attention to that? Then what kind of a certification or qualification do they have? I think it's very important. It's very, very important for you as a parent to pay attention to all those things and go with good knowledge about what you are, getting into. And I think tech solutions, if we talk about, apart from the virtual learning, we know that there are tons of resources now available on YouTube as well, free resources, right? A lot of people will put up their videos and talk about strategies or therapies or whatever else it may be. Just make sure that you know who the source is. Is the source reliable? We always need expert guidance when it comes to a child, because each child is unique. Each child's challenges are unique. Each child's gifts are unique. So looking at something online and then trying to apply it, just be mindful of the fact that you need to have that level of some kind of expert guidance at some level. Okay. Now, we talk a little bit about access to resources then versus now. I think even 20 years ago, there were hardly any online resources available to parents, correct? You as parents had to travel everywhere to access anything. Now the world is completely different. Okay, we know we have free internet pretty much everywhere in the world, not free, but internet accessibility everywhere in the world. Free online resources. We know we can have access to ebooks, we can have access to downloadable activities, we can have worksheets, we can do apps, we can have learning through YouTube videos. There are a million things you can do today online, specific to your child's, anything that you're trying to work on, any target, any short-term goal. We also know that there are many innovative technology solutions available now, right? We have speech and communication devices. We have learning apps. There's a plethora of learning apps available for all children, and in particular for children who have disabilities, specific to communication, specific to speech, for children with autism. You have social stories. Everything is available in an app somehow, somewhere. We have alternative and augmentative communication apps. This is something like Avaz. I think all of you may have heard of Avaz. At least it's the app where we can program certain child's needs and priorities into speech, and we train the child. It's like a PEX board, but it's computerized. And AAC is something that has been a boon for children with disabilities, and this has happened only in the past 25 years. The growth and the learning in that as well. And I know that community building is a big one, where what happened 30 years ago was one person connecting with another, in a not so effective way, because there just weren't any platforms. And now we know we have Facebook groups, we have WhatsApp groups, which are extremely potent sort of ways in which you as parents connect with each other. You as parents, I'm sure, don't feel as isolated anymore as you would have 30 years ago, because you wouldn't know as many people who had a child with autism, or you wouldn't know as many people who had a child with Down syndrome. So this community building that is happening now is a great gift of technology that has been given to all of us, but I believe particularly to parents, where they can be supported and they can support others and they can motivate others to really take advantage of each other's presence, as well as things that are available online, like policies or government benefits and provisions. For everything there's a website, and that didn't exist. So I think that's a huge resource that we must somehow utilize. But then at the same time, I feel there are a few things that we must consider. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about what those are. Access to free resources. Like I said, we have Google, we have YouTube, we have Facebook, we have articles, we can download activities. I mean, you name it and you can access it like that at the click of a button, right? But I feel that along with that, there is a huge information overload that all of you parents are getting, correct? You would agree with me in that there is so much information available that sometimes you don't know which resource to use, which direction to follow. It can be confusing, sometimes really overwhelming. Sometimes it can also actually take you in the other direction, depending on what you follow, how you follow. So I think it's important for you to be mindful about, while that amazing resource exists for us, all of us today, I think all of us, it is our job as parents and educators to really filter the information that we get, especially when it comes to freely available content. So what does that mean? You have to know the potential risks of anything that is freely available. What we need to know is the reliability of the content, right? So reliability of the content is, who is the person creating the content, what is their background, what are their qualifications, the information that you're getting, is this accurate, is this reliable, is it based on research? If you remember, I talked about evidence based. What is it? So I think, for example, even if I were to give you an example of news today, right? If we don't read actual newspapers like we used to 30 years ago, if you remember, I think all of our homes were filled with newspapers, and that's how we would get our information source. If today we don't read newspapers, but instead, follow something that was forwarded on WhatsApp, for example, which we call now, WhatsApp University, we would be in trouble, right? We have to know the source of the content. The same thing applies to children with disabilities, in particular, even more so. Being attentive, paying attention to where are you consuming your information from and how, right? That becomes very important, because otherwise you are going to be overwhelmed and lost, is what I see in a lot of parents. And then they may be trying many things. Like I said, it's a trial and error. If someone said, say this, try kiya, फिर कुछ और देखा, कुछ और try किया, but किसी के भी पीछे कोई evidence नहीं है, तो हम, if you try all kinds of things, you are going to be overwhelmed and tired by the end of it, and not really see the benefits that you should be able to see with your children. So with that, it goes is like reliability of the content, evidence base of the strategy, and also applicability. How well can you apply the strategies that are being told? I think this is where working with a professional really makes a lot of difference. So knowing everything, being informed, I think being an informed parent is the most important thing you can do. And I think being an informed parent is the biggest thing that has changed from then and now. The parent awareness that I was talking about, because you have access to so much. So of course, inform yourself, educate yourself, empower yourself, learn everything that you can, but make sure you work in consultation with someone, so that your child's individual needs and unique challenges and unique gifts can all be consolidated, right? So I can give you an example. So for example, if you wanted to lose weight, right? Now if I want to lose weight, I'll go on Google and I'll find 5 approaches that they say are excellent. Someone will say, do keto diet, oh, you lose weight. Someone will intermittent fasting, oh, you lose weight. Someone will say, go low carb. You see what I'm saying? Someone will say something else. So every school of thought exists in diet weight loss, right? So I can get confused completely. And if I were to just blindly look at that information, someone said they tried keto, you may know it's a type of a diet that they promote, which is high fat diet. So if someone said, oh, I lost a lot of weight because of keto, or I got a WhatsApp forward, or I read something somewhere, or I saw someone's interview on YouTube, and I decided to apply that on myself, it may or may not work, because keto may work for a certain kind of an individual. It doesn't mean it's going to work for every single human being out there, right? Because we are all unique. Our body types are unique. Our individual metabolisms are different. So what would I have to do? I could educate myself. I could learn about the different approaches, and then I should go to a nutritionist. And I should say, here I am. This is how much I want to lose weight. This is my current life. These are my medical conditions, okay? And I have read that this keto thing is really effective. What do you think? Now, if I do that, then I'm going to get a best outcome for myself, because someone is individually working with me to see my condition. So the same example, if you apply it to children with disabilities, I think it works, is that empower, educate, learn, absolutely use the technology resources that have been put in front of us, right? Learn as much as you can, but then consult, find someone who can help you and for your specific child's needs, because otherwise it can be very generic. And by generic, I mean you may not see any results, you may not see any impact, and you are the one putting in so much effort. So you can be confused and overwhelmed, and by the end of it, tired as to what is going on. So this is a bit of a, what do you call it, risk I see a lot, and I'm worried about this risk is because seriously there is so much available, and unless you go in with this perspective of understand but then apply only when you really have full faith in it. So do not just go by someone said something, I read a WhatsApp forward, a friend's child, for him this particular strategy worked. It may have worked for them, it may also work for your child, but we don't know that because every child is so unique, right? So okay, that I think is so I think using tools is very important. Using the tools that are available to you, understanding research if you can. I think it would be excellent if you inform yourself and equip yourself with the research to any level, and then you work with an expert around how can you make this educational journey really be effective for your child, that kind of a thing. So that is I think I want to just quickly end my talk by just sharing this quotation. And I think that like I said in the beginning, the field of special education, I think, has been going through tremendous change, and I want to say tremendous progress. Maybe very slow. I believe it's slow. I think we could do much more. I think we need to do much more. There is a lot more need in the field for us to get better. I think we need to get better as educators and provide more supports and effective things to children with disabilities and make the world a much more inclusive place. I think we are far from it. We have a lot more work to do, but I do believe also that we have been moving away from the traditional approaches of the 30 years ago, what we did, into the moving towards the current interventions and current approaches and current policies. So there is definitely progress. Even if it's a small progress, there is definitely progress. And I know that the field is definitely not perfect, right? But it's like looking at whether you look at this from an individual child level. So whether we look at it from a big macro systems perspective, that we are making progress, there is no perfection, but let's keep making progress. Let's keep moving in the right direction. Let's not stagnate at this point of wherever we are as a country. Let's keep moving forward. And at the macro level, let's, you can think about the same thing for your child, that it's about making progress for your child. It's not perfection. So maybe the child is not exactly at the level or the goal or the target that you had set for them 3 months ago. But are they making progress? Are you paying attention to the progress? Are you recognizing the progress? Are you acknowledging the progress? Let us move towards perfection. We are not perfect. And I don't believe that any one of us can ever be perfect. All we can do is work towards. And I think ultimately what really matters is that if we make progress and move in the right direction, then I think that's good news, right? Is what I genuinely believe in. And I think that this summit, which is the theme was, connecting, challenges to opportunities, I think is really sort of in that direction. Is that where were our challenges 30 years ago? Think about it. As a society, as a world, as a rehabilitation community, we had significant challenges, whether it was not having adequate legal frameworks, not having adequate policies, not having any inclusive practices, not having the right kind of, approaches or, perspectives on interventions on disabilities, and to today where we are. I hope I gave you a very quick pulse on today, on where we are, and we are in a better place than we were 30 years ago. In fact, in many ways, we are at a very good place because of the access, like I said, to technology. It just matters how we use it, how well can we use it for our benefit, and always be aware of the potential risk of something that is so connected and so global. And if we went in with that mindset, I think we can get the best of both worlds, to take the resource and to be able to apply it and utilize it without falling into the potential risks that we talked about. So I think with that, I would, like to thank all of you for being here today and listening to the conversation. All my information is on the screen above, in front of you. And if you wish to learn more about the Inclusive Children's Books Project for the Inclusive Initiative that we have on Samarthya Foundation, you can certainly go visit our website. And I think, Somil, do we have questions?
Yes, ma'am. We have one or two questions in the chat box. Uh, yeah, I'm so happy. Like I'm sure Harshali ma'am also will be very happy that we have all the speakers so much aligning to kind of our similar points. Like in the morning we had a session from Harshali ma'am saying what have to actually be the ethics or social responsibilities of parents and parental experts, and somewhere to the point Shivani ma'am also speaking about on the same and the similar grounds about how exactly a parent has to be educated, what kind of references we have to create while accessing the information, find out the source of information, and find out that which resourceful person has established whether it is a valid thing, not valid thing, reliable source, not reliable source. So yes, wonderful. Somewhere I feel that yes, our summit is doing complete justice to what the theme we have set from challenges to opportunities, and the journey which you kind of narrated of last few years. Dr. Shivani has been amazing. Like where we were in the age of just believing the medical system to where now we are adapting the social system, social approach, and then definitely going on ahead to help others as well. Definitely the knowledge resources and awareness has increased, but along with that the dialogue of Spider-Man movie with more
Yeah.
response the with more power you get more responsibility. In a similar way, we as parents also have a lot more responsibilities these days than we had earlier. So thank you so much for your enlightening talk, ma'am. I would not like to summarize because we are running short of time and we are kind of already in a delay, but I'll quickly take a few questions which are there. There's one question in the chat box, ma'am, which says, Madam, can you please tell us how to exactly identify the strengths in the child?
Hmm. That's a very good question, and very difficult for me to say it in 2 minutes, but I'll try my best. So, the start to understand the strengths in your child is to really do an observation. Okay. So, what happens many times is that we are not aware of our children's or our own strengths sometimes. If you think about yourself, do we really even observe what we are good at or what we like? We don't. So, give some time. Do like a structured observation. Structured observation meaning decide to spend 1 hour when the child is playing. Okay, when the child is in a play routine, see what kind of things does he go towards, what is he more drawn to, what does he seem more motivated by, and then within a toy or an activity, do you find that he does something really well or does something he really enjoy over a period of time. Okay, it's not going to happen in one observation, but typically what we would do is we would do several observations at different times. Sometimes you can observe him in the park, playground, see what kind of strengths does he have physically. If you take your child to a swimming class, see there. If you see in a playtime, you can see the child, observe the child in different routines, see if you can find your child in a situation where he's with other children. Is he does he have social strengths, does he have something? And then there are, of course, checklists that we can utilize, what I normally do, and I can share it with Somil, you or Harshali, and you can forward it on to the participants. So what we do is that we have, there are actually strengths, so many strengths in every single one of our areas of development that we sometimes don't even know. So we may just think of strengths as, oh, he sings well, he dances well, or reads well. That's very limiting. Actually, strengths can be so detailed. So for that, I can share a checklist with you. So set up some time, I would say, to this parent who has asked this question, to observe your child, to watch your child, just without any interference. See what they do, where are they drawn to, what do they like to do, and utilize that checklist to see if you are finding certain things within that category and say, maybe this could be a strength, and observe more and invest more time in it to see. Does that answer your question?
Definitely, ma'am. Documentation is going to do wonders for this query and for this implementation of how to identify the strength. Like I say something, I document. I say something, I observe, I document, and on a very regular basis, on a repeated basis, on a consistent basis, when I'm able to do that, I'll definitely get lot many inferences out of my observation, and then I'll be able to decide upon the strength or get conveyed about the strength of my child. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you
Absolutely.
so much
Thank
for
you.
the answer, ma'am. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for bearing with us, ma'am. I'm sure all the listeners will also agree that you have given us wonderful information, wonderful insights, and thank you so much for your participation, ma'am.
My pleasure. It's so wonderful to meet you, Somil, and thanks, Ashali, for inviting
Thank
me, and
you, Shivani.
to all the parents for being here today. Whoever is here, it's such a joy that you took the time this morning, and thank you again.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you
ma'am.
so much.
So on this note, we would like to end our morning session where we saw a lot of things over adult challenges. We saw Harshali madam speaking about her social responsibilities of parental forums and parental heads. Going ahead to the next talk by Mr. Abhijit Rawat over the policies laid down by the government for special needs children, and ending up to comparison of traditional versus current approaches with respect to intervention in children with special needs. We will join back at 2 o'clock with the most important thing when we consider adult with special needs, somewhere which is a topic which is very less spoken about, the prototype of assisted living residential setups, and we have a few experts going to speak and share their experiences about the same. So for now, we'll take a quick lunch break and we'll be back at 2 o'clock. Yes, Harshali ma'am?
Let's get ready for the mega panel actually. It's a mega panel. Seven eminent speakers from eminent, they have eminent speakers with big projects they are running. So let's get more knowledge from them.
Yes, sure.
Okay. See
Sure.
you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you.